Thanks for joining for the Daily Bread Bible Study for day 221. This is Saturday, August 8th, 2020, focusing on Jeremiah chapters 18 through 21. We have some images of pottery and even broken vessels, and we will see that here starting off in Jeremiah 18 with an illustration from Jeremiah of God's relationship with Israel. Jeremiah 18:4 says, "The vessel he was making of clay was spoiled in the potter's hands, and he reworked it into another vessel, as seemed good to him." I appreciate this metaphor. It is much more constructive than previous ones used, namely comparing the Israelites to adulterers. God is seeking to remake the structure of Israel and Judah, which means the current structures will need to be broken down and reshaped. Now, because he shares visions like this one, there are plots to kill Jeremiah by the leadership in Jerusalem. So moving into chapter 19. In fact, Jeremiah's message will not get easier. God calls him to bring the leaders of Jerusalem into the valley of Topheth, outside of the city of Jerusalem. Now, it should be noted that the valley of Topheth, in the New Testament times, it's called the valley of Hinnom, or also Gehenna, which is the Greek translation that means valley, Geh, and Hinnom, Henna. So there it's the valley called Gehenna. Now, there in this valley, Jeremiah holds an earthen jug and then proclaims destruction upon Jerusalem, and specifically the area of Topheth. Jeremiah 19:6 begins, "Therefore the days are surely coming, says the Lord, when this place shall be no more called Topheth, or the valley of the son of Hinnom, but the valley of slaughter. And in this place I will make void the plans of Jerusalem and Judah, and I will make them fall by the sword before their enemies, and by the hands of those who seek their life. I will give their dead bodies for food to the birds of the air, and the wild animals of the earth." It's not a good sign. It's a place of death and destruction, is what Jeremiah is prophesying, speaking on behalf of God. God then instructs Jeremiah with some symbolic imagery in verse 10. "Then you shall break the jug in the sight of those who go with you, and say to them, 'Thus says the Lord of hosts, so I will break this people in this city, as one breaks a potter's vessel, so that it can never be mended. In Topheth they shall bury until there is no more room to bury.'" Now this Topheth, as I mentioned, is an important place, both for Jeremiah and for Jesus. Now for Jeremiah, Topheth is the valley where, according to in chapter 7, verse 31, they go on building the high place of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in their fire, which I did not command, nor did it come to my mind. See, Jeremiah associates this Topheth with idolatry, especially the killing of families by burning children to foreign gods. Jeremiah acknowledges families will also be burned in Topheth at the hands of the invading Babylonians. This brings me to my connection with Jesus. See, even Jesus connects this imagery to this place, one of fire and burning, a place of idolatry and death and suffering. And just as I said previously, this valley of Hinnom gets translated in Greek as Gehenna, and so Gehenna is the name. Jesus describes this valley as a place of unquenchable fire and associates it as hell. Gehenna becomes translated as hell. So in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 9, verse 43, "If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life maimed than to have two hands and go into hell, Gehenna, to the unquenchable fire. Now, I'm unsure if Jesus is referencing this idea that in Topheth, that God would allow, that the people of God made these altars where their children would pass through fire, right? This unquenchable fire. There's a lot going on here, and I believe in Jesus' day and time that Gehenna had become a trash heap with fire, where the fires were always going as well too. Now, I'm not exactly sure all of that, but I do know that Topheth and Gehenna are the same place. And also that really this is connected with our widespread Christian belief around hell. Now, I think it's important to say here that Jesus did not believe in a hell the way that is portrayed by the majority of Christian denominations. It is very clear that Jesus just isn't conceptualizing hell in the way that we are. At the same time, too, there are biblical connections, right? Gehenna and hell, being connected there in the writers of the New Testament. Jeremiah talking about this place which will be a sort of hell for those who experience the Babylonian, siege and massacre of the people of Jerusalem. All of these themes are very much interconnected, but at the same time, it's not appropriate to put our view of what we think hell is into this day and time. It's just inaccurate. It is wrong. It is misleading, especially. So now, does that mean that hell doesn't exist? Does that mean that hell shouldn't be conceptualized as a place of fire? That's up to you to determine. But from a biblical standpoint, it's just not there here in Jeremiah. Moving on to Jeremiah chapter 20, we see that for his actions there in the valley of Hinnom in Gehenna and Topheth, Jeremiah gets shackled. In Jeremiah 20 verse 1, it says, "Now the priest Pashur, son of Immer, who was chief officer of the house of the Lord, heard Jeremiah prophesying these things. Then Pashur struck the prophet Jeremiah and put him in the stocks that were in the upper Benjamin gate of the house of the Lord." He gets put in stocks, shackled, they're bound. And Jeremiah is released in the morning, and he had time to think about it and probably was pretty angry. And the Lord's judgment upon Pashur comes from Jeremiah's words, but also a sense of feeling ashamed. Jeremiah 20 verse 14 says this, "Cursed be the day on which I was born, the day when my mother bore me, let it not be blessed." This reminds me of familiar words from Job when we studied it in chapter 3. After this, Job opened his mouth and cursed the day of his birth. Job said, "Let the day perish in which I was born, and the night that said a man-child is conceived." Now, I'm not sure which came first, the story of Job or the story of Jeremiah, which one was written down when. But there is a very strong connection between these two passages. They're referencing the same idea, not really well referenced in any part of the Bible, any other parts of the Bible. So there's likely some connection here, and just, like the discussion of Gehenna and hell and what Jesus is conceptualizing, I just don't know. Moving on to Jeremiah chapter 21, we see that the lament of Jeremiah gives way to work from the king. Now, the same people who are persecuting Jeremiah ask for his counsel from God. In Jeremiah 21, verse 2, it says, "Please inquire of the Lord on our behalf, for King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon is making war against us. Perhaps the Lord will perform a wonderful deed for us, as he has done 120 years ago, and will make him withdraw from us. So the story of 120 years ago of what had happened where he had withdrawn, and made his wonderful deed happen where the attacking army withdrew. Now we see that this was the prophet Isaiah who spoke to King Hezekiah. There in 2 Kings 19, the prophet Isaiah spoke these words. Therefore, thus says the Lord concerning the king of Assyria, he shall not come into the city, shoot an arrow there, come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege ramp against it. He shall not. Now, instead of saying these exact words, quoting the prophet Isaiah in his day and time, King Zedekiah wants to hear some nice words from Jeremiah, but unfortunately he has to speak the truth, God says to him. Jeremiah 21 verse 7 says, I will give King Zedekiah of Judah and his servants and the people in this city, those who survived the pestilence, sword, and famine, into the hands of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, into the hands of their enemies, into the hands of those who seek their lives. He shall strike them down with the edge of the sword. He shall not pity them or spare them or have compassion. Now, the only bright spot in all of this is that those who surrender will retain their lives. This community who surrenders becomes the so-called remnant of Judah and eventually rebuild Jerusalem. Now, the hope may be slim, but hope always exists for those who love God. May you experience hope even in the midst of difficult and trying times. And remember that God can rework you just as God reworks pottery and clay. So we will look forward to hearing more about Judah next time.